I want to start it out. I wanted to start out by just having everyone that's here just either close your eyes or use this picture or imagine sort of your favorite outdoor space that you tend to go to or you think about a lot and just, picture yourself there, hear the sounds that you might hear, and I'll give you a minute to kind of settle into that place. And once you're there, I just want you to notice like any changes, any shifts in your body posture or in your muscles. Maybe your breathing changed a little bit. Um, just noticing those things that can change when you're imagining yourself in that special place. Maybe you can see all the green around you, or if you're near water, you can picture the water. You can hear the birds. Maybe you feel that nice warm breeze on your face. Awesome. So, I just wanted to do this exercise with you all just to kind of bring you in, rope you in, but also to help connect us while we have this conversation. And so um, I really like the concept of this series. There are so many stories out there. And one story that connects all of us is our relationship to nature. And so there's been a lot of research that shows that, in addition to the natural resources that we are provided for by this planet, nature also provides a lot of positive impacts on human health. And so I wanted to highlight some of these findings here with you today. So there's a book called Forest Bathing, and this is coming out of a Japanese practice of going out to the forest. And it doesn't have anything to do with exercising or any sort of end goal. It's really just to be in the moment and be present. Um, and so this book, the subtitle is How Trees Can Help You Find Health and Happiness. And we see this trend again in a book called Blue Mind by Wallace J. Nichols. And his subtitle is The Surprising Science That Shows How Being Near, in, or underwater can make you happier, healthier, more connected, and better at what you do. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems like it's promising a lot right there. But I can tell you right now that from my own personal experience, I can definitely relate to what they're saying, even without having the science backing it up. In fact, I spent some time in nature today and I just felt so refreshed and rejuvenated. And, for me, when I'm out in nature, I feel like I have more space between my thoughts. And I can see how that can affect my mental health and also my emotional well being. And so, with that in mind, I wanted to talk about how that also, change the focus to children specifically and to students, because that is the general public that I've been working with. And so there's a lot of books out there like this one called Children and Their Environments, um, where they're finding that, in fact, spending time in nature impacts their development socially, mentally, and emotionally. And so this is just a resource if you're interested in finding out more. And so with that in mind, there's also this study that shows that when individuals are in nature, they have a sense of environmental identity. And environmental identity has become sort of, I guess, like a word that a lot of people are using in the education field when it's related to environmental education. And part of the reason this information is coming out is because they're seeing the benefits of an individual's sense of environmental identity and how that is connected to stewardship of the environment. Now, this diagram here is from with the perspective of, teaching children to be agents of change in a time of crisis. And so what they're referring to here is more of like the environmental crisis that we are experiencing. And there are a myriad of those examples. So for including climate change and habitat loss, all those things are built into that lens of what they're talking about here. So just to kind of go over this diagram a little bit, it starts with a trust in nature. And so that's really important to have that trust in nature. There's some people might be afraid of the ocean because maybe they've had a negative experience there. But initially, that's where it starts, and it ends up growing into the outer circle of environmental action. And so, with that in mind, we can see how important it is for children to have these opportunities to be in nature and to connect with nature. And sort of one way, and then additionally, I can't go on without mentioning who has access to nature. And I kept this slide pretty simple because I don't want to go into too many details. I feel like there's a lot of examples of who has access to nature, and it includes those that have historically been marginalized, and also non-abled bodies. And so there's not a lot of accommodations happening for that. At the end, I can talk more about some resources of groups that are targeting those specific groups. But for now, I'm going to focus on what I've had experience doing. And so just to kind of drive the point further, right now with the crisis that we're experiencing, there's actually research that shows that the outdoor science education field is under risk. So there's a lot of these organizations that are not able to provide the services that they have been able to provide. And this graph shows, that there's, 4 million students that were missing opportunities to do outdoor science education. And starting in December 31st, 2020, now there's 11 million students that are missing out. And that number, with what's happening, doesn't seem to really be going down. And so I feel very fortunate to have had that experience that I do have in outdoor science education, because it's so valuable. And the more I learn, the more I'm inspired to continue on this path. And so just wanted to kind of shift a little bit and have you get to know me a little bit before I get into sort of the bulk of my talk. And so I grew up in Riverside, California. So that's where the little sun is. I went to John Dovey North High School, and I was part of the water polo and swimming team. So from an early age, I was very much attracted to the water and wanted to be in water all the time, especially with the heat in Riverside. And so I ended up going to the University of California, Santa Cruz. I got my undergrad in marine biology, and then I have a master's in ocean sciences. How did I get from Riverside to, studying marine biology in Santa Cruz? I find that my own personal story is really interesting now that I have reflected on it, and this perspective of how outdoor science education can impact children's choices and how they relate to the environment and environmental stewardship. But something that I like to kind of joke about is that I grew up in the desert, and like, how does a desert girl end up being a marine biologist? And part of that was my exposure through television, out of all of the things. And so I remember watching Natural Geographic's channel, the Discovery Channel, and just feeling really inspired by all the images that I was seeing. And one day I remember watching some scuba divers underwater, and they were swimming around coral reefs. There's all these fish around. I saw sharks, and I was just immediately sort of mesmerized by all of the life that was underwater. And so that propelled me into studying marine biology. And then I also had an interest in genetics, and that interest in genetics, I was able to merge it with my interest in marine biology. And for me, it's always been, I've always asked myself sort of like, okay, and then what? And what's the outcome of that? And so like, when I found a research lab that was doing policy as well, like, so they're doing more of fisheries management, and I was very interested in sort of the action part of the science. And so that's sort of like where my background is as far as like science goes. But then also while I was a graduate student, I had the opportunity to be a teaching assistant. And I also participated in a program called Professional Development Program, which was hosted by the Institute for Science and Engineering Educators. And that was where I had a really big aha moment of where I learned about inquiry-based learning, project-based learning. And I was able to reflect and think about, well, I wish I had this growing up. I think that could have really impacted my self-esteem while I was in college, could have increased my confidence, and also could have increased my sort of sense of belonging in the world and in the environment. And so I learned all about that, and I decided that I wanted to continue that work. I really enjoyed working with students, learning about what they're interested about, and seeing how creative they were with their approaches to what they were trying to learn. And so fast forward a little bit, and I was fortunate enough to work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We have some fellow aquarium people here, that some friendly faces. So I'm really excited about that. But basically with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, I worked in the education division, and I worked with an outdoor science program. And so here are some pictures of me out in the field, and then there's one of the octopus with the green screen. And then the one right below that is a picture of me of my most recent work doing outdoor virtual education with the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. Awesome. And so I've had the honor to like work at Elkhorn Slough in Moss Landing, California, and I've consistently been working there with the aquarium, and also with the position I have as a contractor with the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And so I did want to give a land acknowledgement. Now, I do want to point out that the information about the people who were previously here prior to the Spanish arriving, and then later on the US rule over this land, it's very sparse, and it's sort of hard to know exactly who was there. And so this is the closest that I can get, and this is actually approved by some Native people from the area, and I got it from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute website, which is down below. But Moss Landing, California is unceded land of the Uñeren and the Huacharon peoples. And with that, I want to give you an idea of what this place is like. I've fallen in love with this place, and I want to share some stuff with you. So Elkhorn Slough is a tidal wetland marsh. It's actually 45,000 acre water. It's part of a 45,000 acre watershed. And here I have a map of California. You can see the Monterey Bay, and then a sort of zoom in where Moss Landing is in relationship to Salinas. And then Santa Cruz is on the north part of there, and Monterey is on the south end. And then if we look at an aerial view, this is what the slough would look like. I have other images that will give us a closer look, but I did want to mention the importance of wetlands. They provide a lot of important ecosystem services, and actually 90% of the historical acreage of wetlands in California has been lost, and that is due to land use changes. And so there's a long history at Elkhorn Slough and Moss Landing of change in land use. Currently, we're surrounded, or Elkhorn Slough is surrounded by farms. It's surrounded by it. There's a highway that goes across it. There's a harbor. There's an energy plant. There's also a train that passes through every so often, and there's also homes. So there's a lot of human activity around the slough here. And then just really to talk about a little bit of the history of this place. There was some major changes in the landscape between 1800s and 1900s. I know that's a huge range, but I kind of wanted to just summarize that. So there was Mexican ranching families that brought farm animals, and actually currently there's a dairy farm not too far from the slough. There was also a lot of whaling happening, so they built a processing plant. And there's also history of oyster farmers that were cultivating non-native species. But the biggest change that we can acknowledge is in 1947 when the channel of the mouth at Elkhorn Slough was created. Now, as you can see on the satellite view, there's a channel that goes into the ocean, and when the tide changes in the ocean, there's a huge shift in the water in the slough, and it basically creates fast moving water that essentially erodes the marshland. And so just kind of jumping right into what it looks like when we're there with the students. So this is all work done in collaboration with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, with a school district that I won't mention for privacy reasons, and with classroom teachers. We also partnered with Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Reserve and with the Elkhorn Slough Foundation, which is also part of the California Fish and Wildlife. And so all these groups came together and provided opportunities for students to be out in nature and connect to nature. But additionally, the incentive behind doing this was also for the students to get credit as an honors coastal ecology class. And we also provided a scholarship for them to continue on their education after high school. And I want to highlight some of the teaching methods that we implemented in this program because I think they're really important. You know, it's beyond just having the students go outside, but it's also, you know, a type of learning that is student-driven, inquiry-based, so they're asking questions, and project-based. So how they're doing all of this is that we're taking the students out to the site, they're making observations, and they're finding things that they get curious about. And so this is very much teaching them the scientific process, the scientific method in this. And on the left-hand side, we have a drone photo of some of the sites where the students were at. And then we have some students taking some water data here. All right. And so I just want to give you an idea of some of the student projects. I really enjoyed watching their creativity. It's amazing all the ideas that they had just from being outdoors, from being given that freedom to explore what they were curious about. And so some students were curious about the crabs that are living at Elkhorn Slough. And so here I have a picture of a levee. So that sort of was a built-in structure to help with the flow of the water. But also now serves as like a platform for research. And so the students would have crab traps that they would set up on the side of the levee, and then they would bring those in and see what crabs they caught. Another example of a student project is for them to look at more of the macro and micro inverts of the water. And so this is really a creative way that the students took it upon themselves to build a plankton tow net. So they built this out of a Gatorade bottle and some tights. And so they were able to filter out the water enough to get sort of the smaller animals that live in the water. And then they were able to look at them under the microscope and basically identify them. And so through all of this, this was a year-long project that they were working on because it was part of an honors coastal ecology class. And so what we ended up having the students do, instead of taking exams, we ended up having them do a scientific poster. These are just a couple of examples of the student posters that they actually presented not to just the public, but also to scientists that attended our poster presentations. And so you can just see like the level of detail, the level of expertise that these students are showing. So this class really built on their connection to nature and their curiosity and propelled them all the way to creating the scientific poster. And of course, some of them were not even interested in going into science after this class. They were simply taking the class because it sparked their interest or maybe their teacher recommended them. But all these students were self-selected. I should mention that they were self-selected, which means they applied to be part of this program. But they were not necessarily on a path to science. And what's really amazing about this is sort of the feedback that we got back later about how more confident they felt, about how they grew their public speaking skills, and how they're going to take that into college. And if I think about my own personal experience, being in high school and finding my way into college, I was not a very confident student. And sometimes I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, no, you got this, like, you're smarter than you think. And I think through this type of experience, it really actually gets the students college ready if that is the direction that they want to go into. And so another really awesome thing that I enjoyed about watching these students grow in this class was that we would not tell them the answer. We didn't know the answer to their own personal research question. And so we didn't have a textbook either. We did have resources for them, and we had a framework, and we provided the materials, and we taught them how to use the field methods, but we never sat down and said, you have to do it this way, like in a traditional chemistry lab, where you already know the outcome of what you're supposed to get. And you have to do it until you get it right. This is very much about navigating that trial and error. And, it was just amazing where in a world that we live in right now, where, it's just like, oh, just Google it. Like, you don't really have to learn anything. You can just go online and find it. These students actually were able to learn a lot. And yes, we did have them Google stuff, but it was mostly things that would help support their findings, like scientific papers and, any sort of history about the Elkhorn Slough. But, seeing them flourish in those conditions of first they're struggling to figure out what they're even interested in, and then later seeing them super confident talking to the public and really enthusiastic about sharing what they learned. And so that part for me was just, very much evidence of the impact that outdoor science education can have on young adults. And now I'm going to kind of start shifting into more of what I'm currently doing. And so, like I mentioned, I'm still working at Elkhorn Slough. And now I'm doing it virtually. So I was, I'm working here with the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, and some volunteers were out there from Team Ocean, which is under the CMSF, and they were taking photos and studying the sea otters, and they got this really nice shot of me on the kayak. And so the idea of this virtual outdoor education is that we're bringing the outdoors to the indoors. We have a lot of students that have stayed at home, and maybe the only thing that they're really learning is just through I mean, not the only thing that they're learning, but they're mostly just sort of stuck inside, and maybe their parents are afraid to let them go outside. Maybe they're afraid to go outside. So what better way than to bring the outdoors to them? And so here in the picture, you can see I'm on a kayak, and I actually have an iPad that's attached to the kayak, and we're able to connect through the Wi-Fi to Zoom calls or Google Meets calls, depending on the teacher's needs. And we can connect with the students and show them all about the slough, and talk to them about one thing I actually didn't mention, which I'll mention right now, is that Elkhorn Slough is part of a marine protected area. And what that means is that there's restricted fishing, there's limited activities at the slough. And so we have to be really careful also how close we get to the animals, even when we're trying to show it to the students. But basically, these are some of the things you might see at the slough. There's also sea otters, there's harbor seals. Sometimes we get sea lions that go in there. We got some polyorchis jellies and different types of jellies that go in. And then here's a picture of the mudbane, because that's also a very important habitat here at Elkhorn Slough. And so this is very different from what I've experienced with the Monterey Aquarium. I am showing you a picture that I found online of what the classrooms are looking like now. So I think just in the last couple of months, A lot of the students have actually been able to go back to the classroom, and they've been doing more of a hybrid style class where, because of limited space and the separation that the students have to keep from each other, they have to limit the number of people that go into the classroom. And so some students are still at home while some of them are in the classroom. And when they're in the classroom, they can have these sort of protective shields around them and they also wear their masks. And so in the picture below is a projector of a bunch of little squares with all the students. So sometimes the teacher will project the students at home to the students that are in the classroom. And so we end up coming into those calls and talking and sort of trying to like navigate how can we pull the students in when they're at home, when they have to like deal with all these sort of differences that they never had to deal with. But the really amazing thing is that these students that we've been working with, they are so excited to be out on the water with us. They're so excited to talk to marine scientists. And they really, we focus on working with students kindergarten to 7th grade. And so it's a huge range. Some of the lessons that we provide are specifically around adaptations and around food webs. And so we let sort of the teachers choose which topic they'd want to cover. And we are able to also have a telephoto lens that helps us zoom in to these animals, because we also have to keep our distance so that we don't disturb them from their behavior. And so I wanted to show you an example here of some of the things that we show the students that we work with. Oh, I'm gonna have to do this way. All right, so here we have a sea otter that's laying on its back. It's floating on the water, and it looks like it's grooming its neck, and it's moving its little fins. And then we have a great white egret in the background there with the long neck. We have another otter here with some algae just holding on to it. And so what's really fun is to see how these students react to the sea otters. They love looking at the crab molds that we find. And they also want to share stuff from what they're working on. And we were talking about some jellyfish that we found. And one of the students just showed us their piece of paper, and it had a drawing of jellyfish, and they were so happy to show us. And so even though at first for me, it felt really challenging to connect with students, how do I bring them in to the slough? They've shown me that it's actually not as hard as I thought it was. That as long as they have the opportunity to connect to nature, and that we spend the time with them to show them these things that I'm also excited about. So I'm showing them that I'm excited about this, and and then they want to share with me their stories. And it's really amazing just the impact that I've seen from the virtual education, which I didn't think I really was going to be able to witness that based on my previous experience. And so what I wanted to wrap up with was that, regardless of what avenue we use to connect the youth to nature, it's very important to continue this work, and especially in a time of crises like the one that we're experiencing today, and just the value that is in there, not just for the students, but for the greater population, where we're talking about connecting the students to nature that eventually leads to an environmental identity, and then eventually that leads to environmental stewardship. But that also leads to a lot of other health, positive health outcomes, mental health, social health, and emotional health. It helps them feel like they're part of something bigger. For example, with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where we took the students to Elkhorn Slough, we took them there on a weekly basis, and they didn't live too far from there. So it also helps them feel a sense of belonging, and it helps them feel connected to a place and to a community. And so I think, for right now, like what my interest lies in is continuing this work, continuing, regardless of it being virtual or not, continuing that accessibility to nature and finding ways to increase that accessibility to for myself to play a role in that increase in accessibility. And so with that, I wanted to leave you with a couple of resources, and you can always come back to this on the recording, but just in case you're interested in learning more. And I did want to leave some time for questions. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you all. And I'm happy to share my experience with you all. Thank you.